What's up, YouTube? In this video, I want to discuss a couple of really cool ideas for creating a template which you can use for DJing and live performance. So there's something really special about the ability to drag projects into another project that you're working on in Bitwig. And we're going to take advantage of that to create a DJing and performance template. So this can be used for both live performance and for DJing, or for hybrid sets of live performance / DJing. So I'm going to discuss all of those techniques in this video and yeah, how to set up your own template. Anyway, let's dive in and have a look. So the first thing that I want to discuss, which might not be super obvious to a lot of people, is how to get stems out of Bitwig. So here I've got a finished project. You can see that I've kept most of the kind of elements in 4 main groups: kick and bass, percussions, leads, and sound effects. I obviously do have like subgroups underneath that, but for the kind of stems thing, I generally keep it kind of simple for about kind of 4 tracks. You can, deviate from that. I know some people like to split up like the main leads with some of the other atmospheric leads. So, I mean, you can go up to 8 tracks, whatever, that's up to you. But for this video, the idea is still the same, how you would actually get the stems out. So there's a couple of ways to do this. You could either add audio tracks, route the inputs into those, like you would in Ableton. Or what you could do is you could go export audio. And then here, what this allows you to do is it allows you to select multiple channels by holding the shift. So if I select, hold the shift, select kick, bass, perks, leads, and sound effects, what this is going to do is this is going to now render all of these separate elements as individual WAV files. The cool thing about this is it keeps the sidechain stuff intact. Say, for example, you've got any sidechain from the kick to the synths and that kind of stuff. It keeps all of that stuff intact if you render it this way. So let's say loop region. So it's going to export the entire track. And then, okay. What we want to do here is we want to add a new folder, which we can say, for example, call this track name. And then I just want to maybe add the suffix stems, just so I know that it's the actual stems for that. And then what will happen now is it'll actually render the entire project, but in individual WAV files. Okay, so let's talk about preparing the tracks for the DJ template. So like I said, you can do this with stems, you can do this with individual WAV files. I'm going to show you how to do it with both, and then you can kind of fine tune it to suit your particular workflow. So we're most likely going to be wanting to work in the clip launcher view for this. We can remove anything that we have already. Ignore this control room. This is something to do with my outputs and recording the videos. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a group track. We can call this master, and then everything that we do for the project is going to go inside this group, and then we can always drag from the group. Does that make sense? So here, let's add 4 audio tracks, right? Because obviously we had 4 stems. We can drag those into the group, and we can name them accordingly. We don't actually have to, but I mean, let's just be precise. We're also going to want to make sure that the levels of the tracks are at 0, because they default to -10. Now what we can do is we can drag in the stems into the correct channels, right? So we have kick and bass, percussions, leads, and sound effects. So if we trigger the scene, it should play back the entire track. What we can do is we can actually just set the tempo real quick. I believe this is 142. We can set the tempo over here. So now if we play this back, it's going to play through the entire track. However, we don't want that in a live performance or DJ context. We might want to hone into a specific loop that part, or take out a certain part and kind of mash with the arrangement of the track. And I want to talk about a couple of ways which we can do that. So what we can do is we can open up the track over here in the clip view. We can start to piece together sort of miniature loops, which we can use to loop through while we're performing the track. So here, for example, what I want to do is I want to just take this entire thing and just duplicate this so we have like a fallback. We're going to delete that first scene, so don't worry too much about that. And what we want to do is we want to kind of zone in here to the first kick and bass. Sometimes what happens, because of like the arrangement and stuff, sometimes I'll have like a few beats before, and so sometimes you might just want to like bring that back so that everything lines up. Does that make sense? Obviously with the intro, sometimes things aren't exact. So here you might want to figure out like how long bars do you want. I generally go with a size of 16 bars, but it also depends on the context of the track. So here, for example, now let's jump into the percussions, and let's do the same thing. Here we had the track starting at 33, and then we had 16 bars of loop. But remember, we have to shift it so that it's 2 beats backwards, so that everything lines up accordingly. So if we play this kick and bass and this percussion loops, obviously there's nothing prepared for this part of the track, so nothing's going to play. Let's do the same thing with the lead. So on and so forth. So here we've now got on 33 to 49, and then let's shift it back 2 beats. So you'll see now we have this like fill right at the end of the bar here. Okay, cool. Notice now we've looped it and it's seamless. So it can just kind of keep looping over and over again, and we don't hear where that loop is, and that's the important thing. Now what we can do is we can start to expand this loop by selecting all of these, holding control, and then just dragging. So then now what we want to do is we want to jump into the next clip and simply just move it over so that now we're looping the next 16 bars. And we want to do this with all of the parts. So here, if we select, so if we see here, okay, we're moving over to 49, right? And if we select these two, we can actually shift this to 49 and it works on both clips. Does that make sense? So here, 49, 49. So if you just get the number, you can actually move all of the clips at once. You don't actually have to jump into all of them. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit of a workflow hack for doing this very quickly. Now what I want to do is I actually want to jump in and start to color these clips accordingly. So for example, here there's not much going on, so we can color these clips yellow. Here there's slightly more going on, so we can have a slightly darker yellow or orange or something like that. And then we have a little bit of a break at 65. So let's just select all of these, copy them, select them again, and then move this over to 65. Move this start point over to 65. And then let's just double check that they all moved over. Cool. So this is a little bit laborious, but once you have the track prepared, you're done. And then you can perform it however you want. You don't have to prepare every single set that you do. So it's almost like preparing cue points. You know, from those who aren't DJs might not know what cue points are. Essentially, it's like when you load a track into Traktor, you can select like a couple of points where you want to start, where you want to loop, where you want to do certain things. And so you're kind of doing a similar thing here, where you're creating certain parts which you want to loop and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to fast forward while I do the next thing, but I want to talk about the next important thing that we need to set up here. We can actually go ahead and just remove these first 3 scenes, because we're on a roll here, and we can always go Control I to add in a new scene, for example, so to create the intro and stuff like that. So anyway, here what we want to do is we want to select all of these clips, and we want to go over here to this section here, next actions. So something cool that they've added here is this times loop. So now you don't have to worry about the length of your bars anymore. It times it by the amount of times that the clip plays. So sometimes you may have bars which are irregular sizes, 16, 8, 32, as the track progresses, or as the kind of energy changes in a track. And so being able to know you just need to play the clip once and then it loops, or you may choose to play it twice, etc., and then it loops, is a very cool feature. Whereas I think in Ableton you still have to punch in the exact number of beats, and you did in V4 as well, which is a little bit annoying. But anyway, what you want to do here is we want to click this to play next. So hopefully these now all do the same thing. So what this means is that it's going to loop once and then play the next track. Does that make sense? So if we select this first clip, it's going to play the loop, play the next part of the loop, and play the next part of the loop. And it's essentially going to progress through the track as we had it originally. However, now we have the ability to actually pause certain bits. We can take out the leads, we can affect certain parts of the track, and do all sorts of stuff like this. So it's almost like we have the ability to jump in and loop certain parts, or we can take certain parts out. It's like we have the playability of a DJ set with the kind of malleability of a live set. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to fast forward while I prepare the rest of the track, but I want to talk about some of the important steps. So here, for example, at this drop, we could potentially sit and replay the loop every time we want it to loop over and over again, or we could jump in here, edit these to 4 times or 8 times, or however many times you want the loop to play. However, I prefer to create, let's say, cue loops in the project of certain loops and stuff that I know are cool, that I might want to recall at a moment's notice. So let's say, for example, the first main drop. What I'll do is I'll literally copy everything here down to the bottom, to like a blank clip at the bottom here, or a blank scene at the bottom here. And we'll just select these clips and color them something like purple, something that doesn't exist in the project already. So it's very visual, like, okay, this is something different. And then I will turn off the next actions on these clips. Just double check that they're all off. Yeah. So now say, for example, we're playing the track and we want to quickly jump back to that main drop. We can just, poof, hit this scene over here, and then it's going to just loop that main drop indefinitely while we can kind of tweak effects and do all sorts of stuff like that. And then we can just jump back into where it was in the sequence and then let it play through. Does that make sense? So I generally do this with all of the main drops. So we've got main drop 1 here, and then as we kind of sync up everything else, all the different loops, I'll put in like main drop 2 and main drop 3. So that I've got those 3 cue points that I can just jump to at a moment's notice. Okay, so have a look here. We've got this part, which is this main breakdown in the track, right? And the problem here is that, wait, is it 145? Yeah. It extends, and then when the track comes back in, it's like off the beat. It comes back in at 176. So the issue is that if we had to time these next actions to each beat rather than the amount of clips played, it's just going to get so complicated. Whereas here, all we need to do is we just need to say, okay, move this loop point to where the beat comes back in again. So now essentially we're just isolating that entire breakdown into one loop. Does that make sense? To 176, this. And then all it's going to do is it's going to check, okay, the clip is this length long. This is the amount of bars that it needs to play for before playing the next one. And it does that calculation for you. You see, like, that's why I'm saying it's such a cool feature. Anyway, so now we've got that whole breakdown, however many bars it is, in a clip, and then it'll seamlessly loop to the next drop, which is here. So let's go like this, copy it over again. We can simply move this like this. We may have to zoom in to get it on the beat like that. Make it 16 beats long, 16 bars. And then we can see, okay, 176 to 192. We can punch that in here. No, wait. We can actually select all of these. You see the length was 31 bars, so it came in a little bit early. So it's irregular, whereas now it'll do all that calculations for us. So we can go 176 like this. 176. And then we set this to 16. And now everything's back in sync. Cool, eh? So this would be drop number 2. I actually haven't finished the track yet. So what we can do here is we can just copy all of these over here, make them purple, turn off the next actions, add in an extra few scenes here, and then do the final clip like this, 192. But you see how with this one, the kick and bass ends here. So we may want to make this kick and bass part 8 beats, 8 bars instead of 16. And then it'll loop the shorter part. You see that? And then we can say loop this part, instead of just once, loop it twice. And then finish off the arrangement. So here what we can do, there's various things. We can actually say, once these are finished, instead of playing next, play first in block. And so what that's going to do is, if the clips are all in a block like this, it's going to play the first one in that block. Or you can say random in block or something like that. So this is a nice way of being able to say, okay, it plays through the entire track. When it gets here, it goes back to the beginning. And then what you could do is you could say, leave out the intro. Or you could say, add in an extra scene over here. And copy these like this. And this also has one called first in next block. So what we could say is we could play the intro in its own block, and when it gets to the last block of the intro part, it jumps to the next block. How cool is that, eh? And then once it's in this block, it just keeps looping. We can choose different cue points. Very cool, very cool. Actually here, we don't want it to loop after this one. We want it to loop after this one. So here, these ones first in block. And we can, in fact, just delete these clips. So now it's going to just loop indefinitely. And then here we can make the intro. And then set this to first in next block. Add a new scene here. And then these ones can be play next. And then these can all shift back to the starting on the 1. And now we have our entire arrangement mapped out with nice cue points and loop points. And it should just go through seamlessly. What we can do is we can actually just double check that. And then what I'll do is I'll save this as a project inside the same folder as I had the stems. So let's go ahead and do that now. Save as. In fact, we can create a new folder in here, because the stems will be in this folder. And we're going to call this DJ template tracks. This track is called Acid Rain, and I'll say prepped because it's finished being prepared. It's not the original track project. Cool. So now I'm just going to play it through. We can see if it works. Okay, so preparing full wave tracks is pretty much the same, but the only difference is you're working with a single audio file. You're not working with the stems, of course. So here, let's just set this to 0 dBs, and we can drop in something that I'm working on. Although here, I actually want to set this down a little bit because the track is mastered, and I've got stuff happening here. I'm going to drop this over here. I think this one is in 140. So it's a similar thing. We're just going to find the loops and create cue points that we kind of like the loops of and go from there. Okay, so here we've got the first 16 and then got a bit of a build up there. So let's just start with yellow. Boom. So it's a bit easier here. Like I said, because we were working with a single thing, we don't have to select all of them the whole time. We can just go like this, move this one up to 27, etc. Here's a little trick though to make it even quicker. If you just select it and then click up one increment, you'll see this switches to 43. So if all the bar sizes are correct, that basically detects where the next bar size should be. So you can kind of follow that as a guide to quickly just skip through this process quickly. But anyway, sometimes you just want to go in and double check, does it actually land on the beat and that kind of stuff? Because with these kind of breakdowns and stuff, often it doesn't. So then here we have a breakdown. Like I said before, we can just change to a different time. Although this one does land exactly on the beat, so that's not an issue here. Okay, so we want to select them all, and we want to do the next actions. Play next. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to fast forward this process, and then we're going to get into actually creating the template to perform all of this stuff. Okay, so with this one, you see how we've got this extra 2 beats here. So again, the next actions is just going to take care of all those calculations for us. Really, really cool. Although now in the next time, we just have to remember to switch it back down to 16. So let's move this over. And now we want to set this back down 16. Although here, there's another, it's like a fakey drop. So here we can go till this part, which is actually 24. And then it's going to be the full 16. Or it's actually weird timing for the rest of the track. Interesting. So then here, we can do that thing where it just loops and then goes back to the beginning of the first in the block. So let's just say loop it at this part over here. And then like this, first in block. Cool. So now what I want to do is I want to get the main drops, which was, I think, this part, this part. So now the cool thing is if we keep these projects, we can always jump back, fine tune it for the next performance. So we don't actually have to be exact with this preparation. We can kind of just wing it. And then, you know, when we're actually performing the track, it's going to just be, we can test it out, come back into the project, fine tune it for the next performance. Does that make sense? Cool. Okay, I'm going to quickly do one more. Okay, one important thing before we actually get into building the template. If you're using a control room situation like myself, you're probably going to want to jump in and actually just remove it from the project and then just set up the outputs as normal. So here, for example, we would send out to the speakers. Cool, everything is working. And then what we can do is we can actually also ungroup everything that's in the track and then just save it again. Now, if we want to edit it and you still need the control room, you can simply just go new project. I mean, mine automatically opens with the template with the control room. And now we can actually make use of Bitwig's ability to actually just drag in a project into the project that we're working on. So here, for example, we can actually just drag in that full acid rain project, yeah, and now it pops it in as, you know, as its full clip, or its full project with all the scenes and everything intact. So now we can edit it and then save it this way. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's just one thing to note. You're going to want to jump into each of those projects and just make sure that we've turned off the control rooms. Cool. So the entire kind of idea or concept of this DJ template revolves around the idea of dragging in projects. What we want to do is we want to basically set up 2 groups which are going to act as track A and track B, kind of similar to a DJ mixer, and then you're going to treat those groups like CDJs, where you're going to load up the project into the CDJ, perform it, use the groups as the mixer or this template as the mixer, and then you can load the next track into group B, for example. So let's just add 2 groups and we can call this deck A and add another group which we can call deck B, right? And so now all we need to do is we need to simply just drag in one of those projects into either of the decks. So here, for example, we can start off with this track. We can drag into deck A and we can start off with the intro here. Oh, I think we need an audio track or something in the group already. And then we can actually drag it like this. Yeah. Like that. It's a weird thing. So you can just add an audio track into each group as just like a ghost track. And so now we can just load this project into deck A, close it up, and then we can load another project into deck B. And now we use these scene play buttons like this to play the different parts in the track. And because we've color schemed it, we can kind of quickly see, because of the scene colors, we can quickly see what's happening with the tracks. How cool is that? So here, for example, if we want to start off on the beat on deck A, we know already the track starts here and everything's going to be like automatically aligned. Let's just get somewhere closer to the tempo that we're going to need. And we're also going to want to add some effects, stuff like volumes and EQs, so that we can mix the stuff a little bit more, we can transition a little bit better. Some people like to use these crossfader systems that are built in here. Personally, I don't prefer to do that. I prefer to actually mix with the EQs, but I'm going to discuss my technique. If you wanted to use the crossfader, you could simply set deck A like this and deck B like this, and then you could use this. You could map it to a MIDI controller or something, and then this would give you the ability to mix between the two tracks. So here, let's actually try this out. We can actually play the main loop from each track like this. The reason I don't like using the crossfader, though, is you can hear when you get to the middle, you get that weird low-frequency phasing situation happening. So I prefer to use EQs to cut the lows and transition that way. So we want to create a kind of rack of effects that's going to do this for us. So I like to do this in Snap Heap. In fact, I've actually got a template that I use for this, but I'm going to show you how to quickly set up that template. So here, for example, what we could do is we could set up a 3-band EQ, and we could use a macro to control this low frequency, right? So here, let's set up a macro to control the low frequency by 50%, and then we want to turn it down all the way. So now the macro is going to go up to unity, right? And then we're going to call this lows. We can create another one for the mids, and another one for the highs. So I like to control the volume inside an effect as opposed to on the actual mixer, because this way it gives us the ability to stop at 0. So here, for example, let's set the gain to % mode and then set this to modulate to 50%. So now we can slam the fader up and it's always just going to hit 0. We can never go over the kind of initial peak point. So we're not going to create any peaks or anything like that. And let's call this volume. So we've essentially created a very basic DJ mixer. However, one thing I want to note is that the 3-band EQ doesn't actually cut down to infinite, minus infinity dBs. It's only minus 16, which doesn't really cut too much. So we can actually just duplicate it. And now we're going down to minus 32, which is a little bit better. Depending, obviously, on how audible you want that to be, you can kind of do it again and again. But I'd say stick to 2, perhaps 3. But when you start to get to 3, you can start to hear a little bit of phasing stuff happening. Most of the time, I end up just using the lows and the volume to mix. So what we could do is we can actually set up project modulators. Let's say macros, just because we want to be able to do multiple at once. So here we could say set this to deck A lows and volume. We probably want the volume. In fact, you know what we could do is we could have the mids as well. And then we've got 3 and we can just put them side by side. And then we've just created a kind of DJ mixer here in the global modulators. So we don't even have to open the devices. We can do all the mixing from one spot. See, that's one of the things that previously, in like the previous version of Bitwig, you had to jump between these windows to actually mix quite seamlessly. So you pretty much had to use a MIDI controller, but now you can use these project modulators where you can have everything on one screen. Does that make sense? So like here, just hear me out. Like I'll show you now. So let's say volumes, and then let's assign these to deck B as well. Let's add some macros here. Okay, so obviously it can be a little bit more seamless. You do understand that, like, I'm just kind of doing this quickly on the spot, so it's not as seamless as it could be. There's also a bit of volume differences because the tracks are unfinished and that kind of thing. But I want to show you the proof of concept here, where we can simply just add a different track, mix that in. So I'm just going to kind of mix around a little bit. So yeah, this is slightly botched quick performance, let's call it. Okay, so I forgot to mention something crucial about loading the projects. So we actually want each of those prepped projects, like all of the stems for that, to be in a group. Because here, if we just browse to that folder directory in the Bitwig browser, for example, we can drag stuff from outside of the project. We can drag stuff from the project on a kind of modular level. So we can drag the folder, not just the entire project. We can drag just a single folder from the project like this into the track. So we could use this browser as our kind of like track pool where we're loading the tracks from. And then what's going to happen is that folder is going to automatically route to deck A or deck B or whatever the case is. So here, for example, we want to open this, and then load the group into the deck. Does that make sense? So that's how you keep all the routing intact. So that's about it. That's about it for the main concept. I just want to talk about a couple of ideas how you can expand this a little bit further. So if, for example, you have tracks that are perhaps different tempos and you want to shift from one tempo to another, a really nice way of being able to do that is to use a master automation clip. So here what we could do is we can set up a clip that's going to modulate the tempo from a value that we want to the resulting value. So let's say, for example, from 140 to 142 over here, because we have a variance of tracks from that kind of tempo. Then what we can do is we can just fire off that clip, and it's going to automatically shift that tempo for us. We want to make sure that this is not looped though, so it just happens once. And so here we can name this clip, for example, 140 to 142, and then we can see exactly what it's doing. We can also create one that does the opposite, back down again. So like, let's say, for example, from 142 back down to 140. 666, what's happening there? Back down to 140, and then we can just name it accordingly. So that's how to deal with kind of like smaller tempo shifts. If you have stuff that shifts like quite widely in tempo, a really nice trick is to, instead of seamlessly, mixing the tracks, say, for example, we have some effects in the mix. So I want to load up a delay over here on a send channel. And then what this is going to allow us to do is to send something to the delay, right? And then here, let's set up another clip. So let's say, for example, we're going to do a crazy shift from like 140 to 85, right? And then let's set up that automation, the transport 140 to 85, and then set looping off. Then here what we can do is we can play the track, mix in some of the delay until the feedback is like really high, mix out the track so that just the delay is audible, then fire off that clip. And then what's going to happen is it's going to shift the tempo of the delay so that you're going to get this kind of whoop, 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 whoop kind of warping effect, which you can then use. You can then drop in the track, like slam mix it in. Let's just test this concept. I don't have something loaded here at 85, so we're just going to play the next clip, but let's just see what happens. I don't know if you can kind of notice that, but obviously with MIDI controllers and stuff, and doing it with, I'm doing it with a mouse, obviously, so it's more visual for you guys. But obviously, you can get a tighter mix with MIDI controllers. But did you hear how that delay kind of slowed down? And then when the beat comes back in, the delay is synced to the beat. So you're kind of using delay as a mixing technique. Pretty cool little added extra I thought I would throw in there. Awesome. I think that's about it. Oh yeah, I also wanted to mention that within the project files, you can have MIDI, you're not necessarily only limited to audio. So you could have your entire project loaded, but I mean, that's just a bit excessive. But also what you could do is you could use this as a means to create a kind of hybrid hardware and software set, where, say, for example, you have certain MIDI clips that are firing off certain synths. You can prepare those kinds of things, beforehand, have all the MIDI lined up and everything perfect, so that you can kind of mix a track that's perhaps like a hardware mix track that you're doing on synths and stuff with a DJ track. You can kind of transition between the two. Pretty cool technique. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that like button. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.